Welcome to Designing Hollywood. I am your host, Phillip Boutte. Thank you so much for joining us. Our guest today has the unique ability of being a designer that marches to the beat of her own drummer, while still managing to infuse every project she works on with the perfect amount of style and accuracy. She finds the core root of the character, makes them look as good as possible, but also makes sure that they stay true to themselves. With this designer, the devil is in the details, and sometimes the decision to play on the lack thereof. It is my pleasure to introduce the highly celebrated and always fashionable and cool as hell costume designer, Miss Dayna Pink. Thank you, and thank you for joining us. I like to do at the very beginning of this, I just get the boring questions out of the way because everyone really wants to know, how did you get your start in the industry?
Well, I was a stylist for a long time. I started as a stylist I was in Detroit. I actually started doing bands like rock bands and musicians and music videos and commercials. And I did that for a long time. And I moved to LA because I sort of hit a ceiling in Detroit of like, how much work is there going to be? I could work this many days a year, but like there was no place else to go. So then I moved to LA and I started doing commercials and music videos. And I worked with, I did a Tenacious D music video with Jack Black, and it was amazing.
It's so crazy.
Yeah, it was the greatest song in the world. Do you remember that? I don't know.
I sure do. No, I sure do. I love them. Yeah.
So, anyway, I did that video, which Liam Lynch directed, and then they were going to do a movie. So they sent me the script for the movie. I guess Liam was interested in having me do it, and I read it, and I was like, wow, I don't know if I want to do a movie because, I work for this person, this person, this person, this person. So I have a million clients, and like I don't want to say I'm not available for 6 months or whatever. What's going to happen if I take myself off the market? And then I went in and I had this meeting, Liam, the producers, and we're sitting around the table talking about the script. And suddenly it became, what t-shirt is he wearing when he gets off the bus? And where did he get that t-shirt? And what is the thing? And it wasn't about what, but it was the why. It was, why is he wearing it? And what is it saying about himself? And where did he get it? And Jack and I eventually came up with this whole thing. Like I got it at the Ren Fair. I was doing a whole, and it's just like,
awesome.
In that moment, I was like, oh my God, we're storytellers. Like it isn't just about what's the coolest, greatest, like what is this saying? And it just changed it still makes the hair stand up on my arms when I'm talking about the fact that like what we put on somebody is already saying something before they open their mouth, So the idea of being a stylist, and I still do styling. I still have clients and I love doing styling. But doing styling is more about like, what's this moment and like, what's new, what's fun and what's fantastic. And doing a film or a show is like, telling a story and contributing and being part of a bigger picture.
I love that you address this. No, that is honestly perfect. It's the perfect way to describe what it is. I actually parallel your career in a different way, which is I started doing production designing and I was doing big music videos and doing that same thing. And my same fear or anxiety was when I started to do more costume illustration, I was doing costume illustration, then and I was trying to balance my client list where I'm just like, can I still do production design if I'm also doing this? And then I found a way to kind of do both. But I remember thinking about it, but I initially ended up, I leaned more towards costume design and costume illustration because I loved telling that story. I loved being able to be a part of that story and that process.
Something bigger. Yeah, I agree. So for me, and I still do styling, and I still do. I design uniforms for hotel properties, and I do some other things. But yeah, it's really great, and I like all of it for different reasons. Like it's all inspiring for different things.
Well, that leads actually to one of my other questions, which is, since you're not just one thing and you're doing multiple things, how do you fight creative burnout, or how do you keep your mind in being able to switch from one thing to the next, like going from like, say, styling where you're thinking about the now and then going directly into a character where you're thinking about the why?
Interesting. I think for me, it's all one big thing. I think once I sort of leaned into the fact that this is this and this is that, then I could just sort of like, I look at like I'm on one huge job. If I, you know what I mean? Just because all the things that have to get done in a day, they all get done, and there's different parts of your brain that you're using or different things that you're thinking about when you're designing a character or when you're styling or whatever. But it's just like all the things I love, it's all about clothing. So that's the common denominator. So I just sort of figure it all out. And every single day I'm grateful for what I do because I love all of it. I love the idea that clothes tell people something about you. And so I just feel really lucky to be able to do what I do every day.
Now, I love that as well because it's like it's such a labor of love, and we do work a lot of hours, and we're kind of constantly pouring our creativity into it. I find for me, one of the things that is, I guess, most useful, or the thing that I'm most grateful for, is that for every project, I feel like we get to learn something new, right? So it's like every project, it's like, okay, well, like you're in the deep South, now you're in the past, now you're in the future, whatever it is, right? So do you find that same experience, like where each project or each thing you're doing?
And by the way, it's even doing commercials. Like I'll never forget when I started, I used to in Detroit do commercials, and I used to work with this one director. We did a lot of like pharmaceutical commercials, and I was in like the laboratory where they're curing cancer, and they're coming up to me like, "Your job's amazing! Oh my God, what a cool job you have!" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me? Like, you know, what? What are you talking about?"
But like, what do you mean? Yeah.
Right. Like you get to learn about all different things, no matter what we're doing, you know. And yes, you know, projects teach you something, but even, you know, styling teaches you something, and you're learning a new designer, or you're learning a new combination, or you're learning, you know, you're putting some, you see somebody else get inspired by somebody else's did a shoe with a thing, and you're just like, well, oh my God, it's so amazing because it's visual. We have a visual art, you know, what we do is all, which is interesting because this moment that we're in, this COVID moment, the inspiration is more challenging because we're not out in the world and we're not seeing all the things that we're used to seeing. We're watching television. I'm getting inspired by people's amazing work and what they've been doing, but it's a different moment right now. So you have to find it wherever you can. Nature is super inspiring. And so I don't know, I feel like I've been kind of getting inspired by color maybe and different things like that. I don't, you know, I think everything is different. Every job is different, and inspiration is wherever you can find it, you know?
I think that that's actually interesting. In your story, I find inspiration in so many different things, and pulling from stuff, or even just taking a walk outside. Like sometimes when we used to work in the office, we'd be working at like a costume house or something. So it's like there would be times where I'd be like, I'm really stuck, and I would take a loop around Western costume just to clear my head. And then I would see something, or I would see someone walking, and it would just kind of jog me back into it. Your story also made me laugh too, because there was a project where I had to do a spacesuit, and the producers actually had me talk to an astronaut, like an actual astronaut. And he's like, your job is so cool. And I'm like, but you go to space. Like, I'm like, what are you talking about? So it just made me laugh. When you talk to like a regular person, like you're researching cops, and you talk to them and hear what they do every day, or you hear about like, you know, oh, they're doing, you know, I was doing they're doing rappelling exercises where they're jumping out of a plane, and you're like, oh, I was just sitting and drawing, you know, like it's like a different thing.
Right. These shoes would look great with your outfit.
Like, yeah. I find that super interesting.
Another aspect to it is like, it's really hard for me to have someone shop for me. Some people like to just have everything brought to them and then they look through it. But for me, I actually don't know what it's going to be until I see it.
Until you see it, right?
So I have to be the one to go to the store, and it reminds me of when I was doing Transformers Bumblebee, and we had an amazing textile artist, and I was trying to line a jacket, this vest, I think, for Haley, and I was like, yeah, I think I want like a buffalo, like I want a check or I don't know, I just want like some kind of rock and roll thing, And so she went out and she brought back, she went day after day and she was just bringing back fabric. She's amazing. She brought, and I'm like, no, that's not it. And I walked into ISW and I found some crazy silk, circular, black and yellow thing. And she was like, when I came back, but you weren't looking for that. Isn't what you said. I'm like, I know, because I didn't actually know what it was until I
you had to feel it. You had to feel it. I think that that's a part of the job too, in terms of like, it's almost like using, it's like, for me, it's drawing, right? And looking at research. For you, it's like you go out in the world and you have to experience life and touch it and feel it. And then that's kind of like the process that kind of hones it together. I think that that's really interesting to be able to go out and look at something, because you're right. Sometimes you are inspired by something, you're saying it just needs to feel a certain way. And that movie, by the way, was really beautiful in terms of finding, you had such a, Haley's character specifically, like such a heart. So it's like she really had to kind of feel a certain way in order to play off of Bumblebee, but that story was really cute. So I thought that just the way that you handled it.
Yeah, he really did a beautiful job finding the heart. And it was a quiet little story for this big, loud, crazy movie.
Right.
It really did. It had a real beauty and softness to it.
And that's that's the interesting part too about your work in that film specifically, is there is this big element going on, but that honestly to me felt secondary to the story, meaning the story was very cute and homely and like very like contained within her and this relationship. So I can also understand why that was something you wanted to do, because it's very much so like a storytelling exercise. And then all that other stuff is kind of happening around it. But it's weird because I like that other stuff, but I found myself walking out of it like, I was really engaged in that movie, you know?
Yeah. And it was 1980s, which is so fun. I love the 80s.
Which I'm an 80s kid. So yes, I definitely understood that part of it too. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about your collaborations now. We already talked about Mr. Jack Black, which was awesome in terms of like how you kind of came to that, and then being a part of that whole Tenacious D rock and roll kind of thing, and just kind of figuring that out, which I also imagine would be very spontaneous, because you're trying to kind of figure out different things and kind of playing it up. But then you also have another key collaborator, which was Steve Carell. So talk us through like how you guys met, or how that collaboration came to be.
The first thing I ever did with Steve was like a promo, like a press promo that he was doing for Get Smart. Mm-hmm. And it was really funny. He, I didn't get a fitting with him or anything. He was like coming in and we were shooting it. And he was supposed to do something with a basketball or something, and we didn't know, and I'd never fit him before, and I didn't know his sizes, and there were no racks. It was one of those crazy things. So we had like a locker room at a basketball court, and he walked in, and I had hung everything up on the locker, so I just made this whole presentation of a locker room that looked like a showroom. He walked in and was like, all right, okay. And then after that, I started styling him. So I started doing red carpet for him and his wife, Nancy, who is amazing. And then I did that for a while. And then I did Crazy Stupid Love because of him, which was, you know, an amazing experience, and my dream movie. You know, first of all, my background is men's fashion. I love men's fashion. And for years, I've gone to Paris to the fashion shows to watch only the men's shows. Like, I don't know, I have a thing about men's clothes. I really, all my styling is on men. So that movie was really just so amazing. What an amazing experience to be able to do that with those people. It was everything. I loved it.
We have to talk about that film, because that film is beautiful, but also just so much of a character development. And it's often described, which I love, because we have our matriarch of this podcast, Marilyn Vance. It's described as Pretty Woman, but for straight men. So I think that there's a nice little correlation there in terms of talking about it that way. So I wanted you to like walk us through how you kind of approach the transformative nature of that through the clothing, because there is a transition in his character and kind of him kind of coming into his own and kind of changing and shifting. Talk to us about that, because it was so great.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, they both had, Ryan and Steve both had interesting art, and they both changed a lot. And it was cool because it was all the fashion, you know, all the things, all the designer pieces. And then we made a bunch of stuff. It was just all the things. And then also it was storytelling, because it was like, you know, who are they and what are they saying throughout this whole time? And Steve is getting more and more and more fashionable. And in a way, Ryan's character is sort of doing the opposite. He's softening a little bit. And I remember the last day we actually shot the scene where he's doing a speech at the graduation. And so I had this suit made for him that was so beautiful. And it was very simple. It was like a really, because he goes, you know, fashion, 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 and like more layers and more stuff, which he even, you know, comments about in the script. And then suddenly he just is comfortable. So he still is elevated, but it's just, it's trying less, you know? So he's in his trailer and he's putting on the outfit. It was this beautiful suit that had a little bit of sheen to it, very simple, crispy white shirt. And we had like a really simple tie. And I walked on his trailer and he's like, no tie. And I'm like, okay, you know, I would think, all right, okay, let me think about that, you know, because of what the moment is, you know.
Right.
And then he, you know, I walked outside and then he walked out and I turned and looked at him and here he is in the suit, crispy white shirt, beautifully tailored, and like no tie. And it was such a good decision because it was really like effortless at that point. So who he was and where he went and then who he landed on, it was such a good decision. Whereas I'm always like, well, maybe this is even, because this goes with great. And then we do square, and you know, and make it, you know, sometimes less is more, right? And sometimes saying everything we need to say with a simple shirt and nothing else. And it was such a good decision. I knew the second he walked out of that trailer, I was just like, oh, thank you. And it is those moments where those collaborators and the people we work with, be it an actor, a director, a producer, makes us better at our job. Because I'm seeing something and I think, and I'm attached to what I'm seeing, and yet it's evolving as we're going. And then there's just, maybe it's no tie. And maybe it's no tie. And it was, you know, that's the right decision. And I'm so grateful that that's where we landed.
I love that, because there's that pullback moment, and also collaborating with your actors and stuff like that, where it's like the other thing that will happen is that the clothing that you're putting on them, or even like, you know, just trying to figure out, is telling the story, right? But then there's also the part that a lot of costume designers don't necessarily talk about, but you guys think about all the time, which is there's this subliminal nature of the actor who's playing the role and what they bring to it. And then you have to sometimes push the costume forward, or you have to pull it back because something they're bringing is also doing it. So it's like a double. Like I said, if you were, you know, designing a prostitute, the actress might play her already overtly sexy. So then your costume doesn't have to be more sexy, because it's going to overdo it. Or so you might have to understand, or vice versa. You might have a more shy person and you have to make her look sexier. So I think that that's kind of an interesting thing that you're doing. I love that.
Completely. And I've been so lucky in working with these amazing people who have really good instincts, who make me better at my job, you know, who really change. Like another good example of that was Marissa in Crazy Stupid Love, Tomei, came in for a fitting and we tried this dress on her, and she was walking to the mirror or something, and we're talking about character, and the way she was walking as this character was so amazing to me that I was just like, hold it, hang on. And I built her this dress, and we put ruffles on the bottom to put like a exclamation point on the bottom of the dress. Do you know what I mean? So then
I like that, an exclamation point. That's awesome.
That's what it was. It was like, oh, it wasn't just anyone playing this character. It's her playing the character, exactly what you're saying. And
correct.
So you're the whole soup that we're making, right? And that's an ingredient to the soup.
Yes. And I think it's like, that's the part. I don't know. There's so much we can talk about there. It's just, that's the love of it, but also trying to kind of balance those things. And I think for people listening, I think that that's one thing that people don't realize that costume designers do. There is a magic to it and an art form to it. They're constantly creating stuff based off the page, but then also having to balance the things that they've learned about the character on the page with who the actor starts to make the character be, and then having to be open to those kind of collaborative efforts. And it's a job that they're doing living every single day, whether they know it or not, subliminally, overtly, like in your face. And I think that that's really cool. So thank you for sharing that, because that's an awesome, avenue
What else
for
I will
people
say
to
about
learn.
that that's really
Yeah.
interesting. Lovecraft was the first television I'd ever done. I've only done films. And there's a completely different long-term relationship that you get with characters when you're doing a television show over this period of time than when you're doing a film. Because when you're doing a film, you're sort of thinking of it as a whole. You're kind of prepping the whole thing at one time, unless it's some huge year-long movie or whatever, but you're kind of thinking of it as this, right? But television, you're getting this experience that's in pieces in a way, if you're shooting it episode by episode, which is how we did it. And so, 5 months in, you maybe see these characters and how they're evolving. So like, if I had prepped the whole show at one time, the ending might have been different than how I saw it. But since it's happening in real time and you're evolving with them and you're watching it happen, then it gives you a different relationship with them, and it gives you a different opportunity for them to evolve in their costumes to evolve.
I love that thought process so much. And I want to say, we're going to go, don't worry, people, we're going to go back to Lovecraft Country because I must spend some time on it. But I do want to transition into, because you talked about that, let's talk about, you have another key collaboration, which is Will Smith, right? And you did Bad Boys for Life, which was a huge heavy hitting project. It, came out with that same thought process. You are now establishing costumes for characters that we already know. Talk us through that, because that's another challenge of just being like, okay, we already know who Mike Lowry is, we know who these characters are, how do we balance that? So talk us through that.
Right. Well, we know who he is, but do we know who he is today? Right.
Correct.
Do we know? Right. So I think that that's part of it. I think whenever you're taking on, there's so many projects right now that have a 2 at the end of them, or a 3 at the end of them, or an again at the end. You know what I'm saying? You're taking on something that someone else did. And so, of course, you're going to respect that. You're going to, know where they're coming from. But where are they today? We're all brought to the table for our special sauce. I'm not brought to do something someone else did. I'm brought to add my eye to it. So like, that's where you're starting, from this place of respect from where they came. And then you're like, okay, well, what have you been doing since then? And how do you feel now? And where are you shopping? And what are we making you? And what is it? What are you thinking about? So, I think, you want to respect the history of something, but not forget that you're brought to the party to add your own thing.
Which I think you did really well in this movie, because the characters are at a different place. You can feel that Martin's character is very much so like, he's not over it, but he's got one foot out the dirt. He just wants to enjoy his life, right? So he's now established. He feels more like a dad. He feels more like he's like, I want to get out of it. This thing is crazy. Yeah. Will's character is forced finally to recognize that he has to, it's like he's caring about other people, but he's also forced to look at his own mortality. He's forced to, this can't continue in the way that it's been forever. And I loved that. That was kind of a core element of the story that I felt like, even with clothing, you kind of went from okay, he's doing his normal flashy, I'm the Playboy thing. And then it kind of transitions. Can you talk about how you transitioned that, or what your thought process was?
I think he softens a little bit also. There's times where, when he's down and he's not thinking about it, when you get dressed in the morning, what are you going to say about yourself? And are you thinking about it? Do you want to be comfortable? We've been wearing sweats for 8 months, basically, right?
Those are cool sweats, by the way, but yes.
But what are we saying, and what are we feeling, and what's going to make us feel good? And so there was a part in there where he was kind of cozy and just sort of comfortable, and then there was parts where he was making an effort. And so I think that we remembered that. And the same thing, I'm going back to Lovecraft again, because that was my
it's not for sure.
The same thing happened to Letty in Lovecraft, which is she out of the gate comes out with a bang, which is like, this is who I am. This is who I want you to think I am. This is what I'm doing. It doesn't matter where I got it. It doesn't matter what the thing is like. I'm fabulous. So there's that. And then as she gets so caught up in figuring out the story and figuring out what's happening, suddenly she's wearing Atticus's shirt, or she has Dee's t-shirt on. Because where's she getting those clothes? And what does she want to feel like when she puts them on? She doesn't want to, she's not wearing heels at that point, So she also deconstructs towards the end. And I did try. I'm like, are you sure she isn't running in heels? Like maybe all she had is
Yeah.
I'm sure. Let's talk about the fact that maybe she was in heels. Like,
They were like,
maybe she doesn't have them in her bag. Maybe.
Well, let's skip actually. Let's talk about Lovecraft, because I think that it was one of those things. Actually, I do want to creatively talk to you about it. I am going to talk to the listeners and just say for a moment that this project meant a lot to me personally, because of what it represented in terms of kind of like addressing as an ability for specifically me as a Black male. It represents the ability to play in a genre that we're often not invited to, which is sci-fi. And that part of it, I had the extreme privilege of being able to actually text Dayna my excitement from week to week and tell her like, oh my God, like this, or like, or I saw this in there, or, I was talking to her about the show and stuff, but also just telling her that, a full circle moment for me was watching this bit of history unfold, and feeling like we were actively watching something change, a shifting change. And like I said, being invited to the table to play, to like, it's like, yes, it's grounded in, Jim Crow, like that's just what it is. But it's like on top of all of that and all the strife of that, then now it's like, there's monsters, there's creatures, like, wait, what's going on? And then it starts to play, and then it goes to all these different places that we'll talk about. So when you were working on it, did you know that it was going to have this impact, or like that people were going to respond to it like in the way that I am?
Well, I mean, that's like a loaded question in a way, because nobody knew what the moment was that was coming for our world, our country. Nobody knew
Yes.
sort of this awareness that was about to unfold. And so there's that. But for people who were conscious, and for, all of us that wanted to be on that so badly, yes, it was a super creative project, but there was way more reason to do that project than just the fact that I get to make a spacesuit. It was really like, it isn't that often that you read something that you're like, oh, I want to say that. I want to be a part of speaking what your language is. So there really was that for me when I read it, that thing about like, oh, okay, cool. The monsters are not the monsters. Like, I'm so down with that, So just being aligned with, what it was saying was really, I felt really lucky to do. And then there's the artistic part of it that was incredible. So it was like all the things mixed together. So to answer your question, did I know? I think we all kind of knew that we were making something important. I think we all, everybody that was on it, we were all in it together, and I do think somehow we did know.
It's some kind of it's good to hear that it also felt good to work on. It's so much of a transformative, transitionary piece. And what I mean by that is the work itself inspires to be able to tell stories and hear different perspectives, and to play around in things that we've often just kind of been like grounded in and very kind of downtrodden in. It just expanded that out. And I feel like it broke open a door for people to recognize that our storytelling process and the perspectives we listen to can be much broader. And I love that so much.
And it goes right back to the beginning when you said we get to learn something, because we all get to learn something, and this was really interesting because I thought I knew certain things, like, who Emmett Till is, but did I know the story of Emmett Till to that, just the thing about recreating that funeral.
Yes.
And, really sort of deep diving into what that was so educational, and it was so interesting. It was just everybody showing up. It's not a funeral where like everyone's wearing this black suit and everyone's in a black dress, like doing the research. That was not what it was. People just showed up. Everyone just showed up. So what does that say? Again, what we wear, what does that say about us? People in their uniforms from what, you know what I mean? Just everyone just showing up as they are, whatever it is. People don't have black suits. People doesn't have a black, like it was, it was just, it looked a little bit different than you would picture in your head. And it was one of those places. I was lucky enough on that show to be able to what if a lot, to be able to say, yes, and could it be this? Yes, and it could be that. And by the way, I'm doing both, you know, like there was all that. But then there were these moments like the Tulsa riots, like Emmett Till's funeral, where it's so important and such a moment in time that I felt really compelled to be really true to that moment. So that isn't for me to go, what if they're all, you know, like, you know, it's not that. So we really respected those things. And I really tried to do it as much like aligned with what it looked like as I could. And it was not the way I thought it was, but it really, I was so happy when we, you know, walked out onto set and looked at all those people. I was like, yeah, that looks like that looks like what it was.
Not only was it pretty accurate in terms of what it was, what that did is like, if you had gone off and you were just like, okay, funeral, and you just phoned it in, right? It feels like a funeral. Funerals, when everyone dresses the same and everything, feel very personal. So they feel very much so like this is family, close friends. It feels like a personal thing. But by doing it and doing the research and opening it up to where people just came as they were, it felt community based. And that's exactly what it was. It felt like people are showing up to, this is an awful thing that happened and everyone's pulling together. And I think that that's a really important element. And I didn't realize it until you just said it, but that's a huge costume element, which is making sure that this feels like that, as opposed to like, oh, this is like, you know, the immediate family and maybe some cousins or some friends. It's like, it wasn't that. This is just something awful that happened and everyone said we must go and support.
That's
and
right. Everybody showed up. So it was like, what does that look like? And, you know, it just looks different than what I would have pictured. And I would never have known that had I not done this. I don't know that I would have researched that and looked at that, you know? So it's learning way more about what actually happened, you know, which is really because he's in our show. You know, Bobo. And so, you know, we made his tie and, you know, we remade it. So, you know, we did there's some Easter eggs in our show, obviously, between William and Christina, there's Easter eggs, and the Bobo had Easter eggs. You know, there's all these little things that we kind of did that you are not sure, but if you go back later, you'll figure it out. You know, that was definitely.
That's how that was to watch that episode. I didn't understand who he was until when they did the Ouija board and it kind of says like, are you going to have a time on your good trip? And it's like, no. And then when I looked at his tie was the cue for me because I'm so used to seeing that picture. That I knew, I was like, oh, it's Emmett Till. And then the interesting part about it is as you went by on the show, you're right. What it did is that there's a lot of people that only knew the surface level of that story, but didn't know all the horrible details or like what the community went through. And it's something that you may grow up with or you may not. I like that the show pulled these images together in a way to where it started to have people that like kind of gloss over this thing, actively pay attention to it and learn about it. And learn from it. You know, that's the only thing that we really can do. And then you talked about Tulsa, same thing. Bringing up Tulsa, there were some people up until this show, or even like Watchmen, who also featured Tulsa. They didn't even know Tulsa existed or that had happened. So to have that open up and people be like, wait, that's not fantasy, or people are going and saying like, is this sci-fi or is it real? And they're looking up and it'd be like, that happened. To know that has been so great because it's something that you like. I mean, for me, I grew up hearing those stories or knowing about them, you know, to an extent. But it's interesting to watch everyone kind of collectively, like as a human race, like learn about this and say, let's address it. Let's look at it. Let's learn from it. And that's what this show kind of does. And then also allows us to have fun. Like it's a weird balance of that, which that hasn't been done before. I think I want to talk.
Sorry, I think that's
no, it's okay, go ahead.
Of Misha Green, who's the creator, writer of this, who's like had exactly the right formula of educating people that don't know and kind of peppering that in with fantasy, with this love story, with all these things, because you're, you know, learning things that, you know, there's some people who probably were so interested in learning, and then there's people who are just watching it because it's a horror show, and whatever it is, you're still going to learn something. Like, it doesn't matter why you're watching it, but we're going to know more after we've seen it. So I think that's part of her genius, is to be able to sort of put that in it didn't stand out as if it shouldn't be there. It's all there because it's all real, you know?
Yeah.
It was really interesting how she did it. She did something really cool, I think.
Give a big shout out to Misha, because I thought that was really great. And I think the way she, like you said, it interweaves so much. It doesn't feel, lots of times with historical stuff, especially when it has racial undertones, feels very heavy-handed. This didn't. It felt like it's going in and out. And just when something starts to get to a point where you're just like, it's pushing it, we're teaching you something, then it's like shape-shifting or like witches or like whatever it is. It's like, just like, wait, where do we go? And like, it just draws attention. Yeah, it draws attention enough to let you take it in bites. And I thought that was great. I also wanted to talk about your work in terms of how you were doing and working within this in the fashion of the show, which is you didn't stick to, I guess, called the letter of the law. You didn't stick to saying like it must be like this is exactly right, but you played within it. So talk to us about how you expanded on the playing within the world, but still making it feel right, as opposed to being like, this is exactly the way that it was, so it must be this way.
Yeah. Well, so right from the beginning, the guy who directed the pilot, Jan Jamaj, I knew him. And so he's the one that called me in for a meeting. And so I read the script for the pilot and it was amazing. And so I went in and had a meeting and I really thought about what I would make it look like. And to me, you could have done it a few different ways, and you certainly could have done it in that period, really just being true to what it was, right? That's one way to do it. But for me, because of how I approach my job and like what excites me about my job, I was like, listen, if you want somebody who's going to do this exactly the period, you can probably find someone who's going to do that better than me. You can probably find someone who's going to know every detail of exactly what 1954 was as opposed to 1956. And that's, you know, going to be one way to go. Or you could do it rooted in that period and then add the sauce, then make it what we want it to, then add some fashion to it, and then make kind of twist your head and go, what is it? That looks, but maybe that can't. What is it? So it's like, sort of, this is a fantasy. There are aspects of this. I mean, there's monsters and there's, you know, there's stuff. And then plus I also read in the script, she had some musical references that were very modern, that were not.
Yes.
So I'm like, well, if you're doing that, then can I do that? You know? And I think that like, they were both really into it. They were like, yeah, that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing. And so that's what I got to do, is just like, we're rooted, we're right there. We did the undergarments, we did the, like, all the, you know, sort of heavy lifting is that period. But then the what if is the fabrics, is the pieces, is the pattern.
Right.
They are the things that, like, yeah. And to me, it was of no moment. It was 54, 56, 52. I was like, oh, let's just go to that place. The history lesson being given by the show is not a costume history lesson. It is a way bigger, more important history lesson than I can ever teach. So I don't think that me taking something that was actually more 1948 and putting that on a character, or not even 1958, whatever it is, I don't think that I was doing a disservice to the story by adding fashion and by just, you know, I mean, we do that all the time. We take things and say, you know, it's the what if it all. Like Haley in Bumblebee, I was like, what if she went to high school with Greg Lauren? What if they were in high school together and Greg was stuff, and then she was deconstructing stuff. So she found this jacket and she took it apart, kind of like her friend Greg.
Right. I mean, that's fun though. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you have to do. Sometimes even when I'm drawing, if I don't have enough information on a character, I do the same thing. You're just like, well, what if this ring was given to her by her grandmother and blah, blah, blah. Like I have to know. And then I'm like, oh, that's super fun. Or like, I'm doing a medieval character and they've got on, like, I know they've got a cloak, but then on the inside of the cloak, I add like they conquered some, I'm like, they conquered this place or this land, and then the cloak is actually a flag from that land, and it's got the you know, the conquered symbol of the, you know, like that type of thing. It's so fun to play around in that. So I love that that's where you were kind of thinking.
Yeah, it goes right back to your question about inspiration. It's
Right.
anywhere. It's everywhere, right? And so we have to be able to like kind of, you know, do what we do and not, you know, sometimes there's times that you have to sort of stick to what it is. And then there's times you're like, maybe it's whatever we need it to be, whatever we want it to be. It makes it a better show, right? We are making movies, we are making television, we are making, you know, a visual art form. So sometimes you don't want to notice the costumes. Sometimes it is a discomfort to notice the costumes because it's a story, and the best thing you can see is someone's skin tone, and the best thing you can see is someone's face and someone's teeth and someone's eyes, and like that's really all that matters, right? And so we're underneath it, you know, because it isn't about that. Atticus's t-shirt, and when you first see him, he had this seafoam soft blue t-shirt because you're going to see his body and you're going to see his skin tone and you're going to see the beauty of, you know, everything about him. And yet that t-shirt, to me, if you look at that t-shirt, it said everything I wanted it to say, even though it whispered it very quietly. It was not scripted. So it's like, sometimes it's that, sometimes it's that. You just got to know where to put the exclamation point.
Well, and some of your exclamation point, I mean, like the other thing about it too is when we talk about play and just trying to find it, and then how you were talking about playing within those periods is one thing I've learned about costume that's really fun is that when you're talking about time period, just because you're in 1955 doesn't mean that all of a sudden everyone got rid of their clothes from 1945. Like, so you have that range, right? But then also what you did with Letty, like some of the stuff just, it's like it flat out saying it, like, because we always talk about story and people in like some of the stuff just needs to be cool. Like, so sometimes it's like you need to look at it and be like, Letty's badass, she is cool, you know? And then what happened is that people want to be her. Like they want to, like, people are like, I need to be that, or like, what is that? And so you've inspired this whole generation now, I know specifically of Black women that are gonna look at those things and be like, I need to dress like Letty. I have to have those things. And vintage style, and maybe they're researching it. And there's a part of that that just is fun, because sometimes we get bogged down in like the details and character, but sometimes it's like, yeah, I did this choice. There was an actual choice in there for the character, but also it's just cool. And it makes you want to be like, you know, like, that's whatever that is, you want to collect it, you want to be a part of it, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And like Ruby is another good example.
Ruby's great too.
For her, when we started out and she was singing on stage, we went through a bunch of dresses that I was like, okay, that's a 50s dress. Like we put her in a dress. Yeah, it was good. It's fine, you know? And then they were like, sexier.
Yeah.
I started to think about what does that mean, right? That one word, sexier. And then then I just took that and just ran all the way where then we made everything for her sexy, because she is sexy. She is so beautiful. And so why wouldn't she be wearing tight clothes? Why isn't she showing all of that? And she just, I fell so hard in love with her. And we really had so much fun letting her just be, you know, everything, and letting those clothes really, like, we fit her tight clothes, you know, we put her in shorts, you know, we made almost everything of hers. And I just had so much fun dressing her, because I think that, like, you know, when she went out on that stage to play that guitar and all eyes were on her, I think she felt it, because it really was beautiful and it really, you know, met the moment.
You did a really good job in the show overall between Ruby and then, forgive me, I don't remember the character's name, but Ruby and then the woman she turns into, or like that going back and forth, right? And then also was it Hippolyta?
Yeah.
I'm saying her name right. So all Phil figured, like, you know, normal sized women, like, you know, a real woman's body, and you made them look sexy and beautiful. So it's very body positive. I thought that the show showed different body types that we don't normally see, and showed how sexy they are, or how beautiful they can be.
Well, they all are sexy, right?
Yes.
They all trusted me enough to say, like, yeah, let's go. We really got to be limitless, you know, we got to show skin, and we got to just make it about the body, which is, you know, a really fun thing for us as designers to do. And that real life, everybody isn't model size. That's just, but you know, we have that also. There's this and there's this, right? There's all the different things, and it's all beautiful, and we got to embrace it all. And show skin. And I mean, how fun, right? What a cool gift to be able
It
to
was
just,
wonderful. It was wonderful to go crazy, and then you did it in a really special way where it I think it hit home with a lot of people, to, like you said, to show it off, and then the clothing fit so well, it just really kind of highlighted, and I think it just gave people something that they're not necessarily, it's played out all the time. It's like, it's not the same old body type that we're used to seeing. It's like no, this is also beautiful, this is also sexy. And speaking of that, I have to touch on this one, for this one before we end, which is, I loved the episode that touched like on Afrofuturism, because I felt like you really expanded. You got to go to the past, future. Like, I mean, there was all these different things in that episode that just was beautiful. And that episode for me is the epitome of like the playtime, where I'm like, finally, we're invited to the table. We get to be here. So really good job on that, in terms of just going, like you said, from like, you had like full war battle scenes, and then you go to like this full futuristic place where it's like robots. I mean, it was insane. So can you talk about like that transition, or that episode, and kind of what your thought process was?
That episode was insane. We were everywhere. And we made most of that stuff in-house. Like,
yes,
all those warrior costumes, we made them. We carved leather and put beads on things, and we layered stuff. And I mean, things were like wall hangings that I was making into things. Like, we really had an amazing experience. Like, sometimes you send something out because, this has to be made, and we know that this is going to be in the future, so we're doing this, and someone else is going to make it, and then it's coming back, and then we're changing it. But what we found, that what we wanted was, again, we didn't know until we were there. So like, making it was our best friend. Being able to just, we had dress forms in our office, and we had them lined up like the warriors, and we were just, having so much fun. And then there was the Josephine Baker and the
that was awesome. Yeah.
They wanted it to be like their tops were going to fall off. So we went through this whole R&D, how are we going to get the bras to bust open? And then we made, put the feathers up. And our tailors were up till 4:00 in the morning the day we shot that, just sewing out. Some of it was literally sewn on their bodies. I mean, I'm sure every costume person watching this can relate to those moments of the smoke and mirrors of it all. But when it all came together, and we, got to do all those things and see them all, it was such a wonderful moment for everybody that worked in our department, because we all had a hand in it. Every dresser holding tape and a glue gun, every single person participated in what you saw in that episode, which was really so much work, but it came from us. We all did it together. So
it was great. Quite incredible. And thank you for sharing that. I have to give a big shout out to Dayna, just for also humoring me in my nerdiness, and wanting to just like, text her and just be like, I just watched this episode and it was crazy. It was such a special thing to experience. And also I remember talking to you briefly when you were even prepping and working on it, and trying to kind of formulate the different characters and stuff. And even hearing inklings of what that was super exciting to me on a personal level, just because, like I said, growing up, you specifically want to see characters that look like yourself, but you also want to be able to go to the cinema and play, or you want to be able to sit in your living room and have an opportunity to just go on a wild adventure, and not be so rooted in the things that you experience kind of in your normal day-to-day life, that you feel as though there's no escape from it. And this definitely did that in the funnest way possible, which is taking things that I know have been hard, have been traumatizing, have just been detrimental, and then somehow like weaving in this thing and playing around with it and creating this beautiful new story. And I just am really happy that you were a part of that, and in such a special way.
Thank you so much. And I appreciated your text. It meant a lot to me to know that experience was happening, outside, that like people were actually like seeing this and soaking it in, and what I was hoping it was going to be was actually what it was. So that was really cool. I was really grateful for that, and which is why I wanted to talk to you about it, because I know that there was just I had some bond with you about it that was super cool, and it meant something to me. So thank you.
No, and thank you. I feel like we won't. One of the things I'm most excited about is we won't see the effects of what this has done. Like we've seen the immediate effect, but we won't see effects for this for another few years because there are people that watched it that are younger now, that was their first experience where they don't have the experience I had. So they're already in a place starting out just youthful and ready to create. You know what I mean? Hopefully,
Cool.
Not super young kids were watching this show, but you know what I mean? Like our like kids in high school or like going off to college that are starting their creative careers, they have a really good base to just immediately, their ceiling got raised because of this. Like it went through the roof.
I mean, how cool is that? And if that's all that happened, then it's something, then it's amazing, it's all worth it, right? Yeah, because that's the whole thing is if we can elevate each other in some way, then we're on the right track.
So let's talk about, because we're running on time. I want to actually talk about to briefly touch on training, which is because we always ask this question in terms of what are your thought processes on the next generation as we're talking about them in terms of like opening up to where we can be, useful to them or training to, the next crop of people that are coming into our field. Like, do you have any thoughts?
Like for us to train them, you're saying?
Yeah, like, or not for us to train them, but even just telling them, like almost inspiring them as designers, like they're coming up, they want to be designers, they want to come into this field. What are some good, like some points of reference or things you can tell them or inspirational things you can kind of tell them to look for or to like where should their head be?
I mean, I really think if you love something, like I just loved fashion. I didn't know I was going to end up here. I just so grateful that I did. But I just loved clothes. And it brought me to this place. I think my eye and what I see and I want something to look like is my biggest asset. So, whatever you love, I think if you love it enough and you pursue it, and whatever that means, to some people it means a really formal education and going to school and taking that path, and to somebody else it means something else. Of like, there's people who start as a PA in the costume department and are just want to be around it and are really hard workers, and then you notice them and they move up that have never gone to school. So what part of it do you love? Do you love the history of it? Do you love high fashion? Do you love the continuity of it? And do you want to be an on-set person who's like, the person who's like, making sure that everything is perfect on set? Do you want to be a supervisor where you love numbers and you love adding it up and you love making sure that it's all working and you love the puzzle of it? What do you love? And, come and work in a department and see what it is, because they're all different pieces. It's just a big puzzle, and where do you fit?
Love that. And I think that for our listeners, I want you to hear what Dayna said, which is it was hard for her initially to kind of formulate how to answer that question because she just loves it. And that's the main core root. You have to love it. It's not about like, oh, I got to meet Will Smith. Oh, I got to do whatever. It's like those things are cool, but ultimately what drives her underneath it is she had an initial love for clothing and fashion. And then she found a way to turn that into a career. But ultimately, the backbone of that career is the love for doing it, because that's the thing that carries you through. Some days are going to be hard. Some days are going to be tough. There's going to be days where you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing. There's other days where there's people that are stressed out, all of those things. And the one thing that carries you through all of that is loving what you do, actively loving what you do, and not what you do, not loving what your career, I guess, represents. So it's like, sure, you're in Hollywood, there's all the glitz and glam, and there's all these famous people, there's all of that stuff and cool projects. But underneath it, what I got from what Dayna said is she loves what she does. And I think that's really important. So youthful people know that that's the case. Also know that you don't have to, she touched on something else by saying, you don't necessarily have to know what you're going to do. Like people often think like, there's going to be this magical moment where I'm like, I'm going to know exactly what I want to do. It doesn't usually work that way. And she kind of says, I just had this love for this thing. And then it just kind of evolved. And you heard she met people, she did this, she did that. She was going around. And then it's like, okay, well, I was styling. And then I started to do this and I didn't even consider this. So I want you guys to just be open to listening to what she said. And when you listen back to this interview, it's very apparent in everything that she has said that that's the underlying current. So thank you for sharing that, Dayna, with us so much.
Thank you.
So I want to thank Dayna for coming on our podcast. This has been really great. I could talk to her forever. I have to thank our sponsors, which is Eddie Marks with Ragvan. And also give a guys say, hey, Eddie, and give a shout out to Marilyn Vance for starting our podcast. And I also want to encourage you all to follow Dayna on Instagram. So tell them where they can follow or follow and keep up with you so that they can come and kind of go on this journey with you.
I think it's Dayna Pink Things.
Dayna Pink Things.
I think that's it. How come I don't?
She's at Dayna Pink Things. It's okay. It's okay. What you can do is it's really easy. Just Google her. If you can't find it, her Instagram comes up pretty quickly, but I'm pretty sure it's at Dayna Pink Things. And it's Dayna spelled Dayna Pink. Okay. Don't make the mistake of spelling her name wrong. And also, I want to encourage you all to follow Dayna over to our friend show, Mandy Line, costume designer Mandy Line. She has a podcast where she'll be interviewing Dayna at a later point, and they will talk about all the fashion details that we weren't able to talk about here, and kind of go into more of Dayna's process and how she kind of picks and chooses and envelops characters with style. Okay, so thank you for joining us, Dayna. Make sure you guys go over to that podcast, and thank you all very much. Thank you for joining us in this special home edition of Designing Hollywood. Bye-bye.
Thank you to our sponsor, Eddie Marks with ragvan.com. Ragvan is Hollywood's favorite place to rent fully equipped, high-quality trailers used by the entertainment industry to transport costumes and garments to and around filming sets in Hollywood. Also, thank you to our viewers. Be sure to follow Designing Hollywood Podcast on social media and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Deezer, and our YouTube channel for complete past and current episodes.